Okay, take two, and welcome to the Quadruple D. And Amazon MGM Studios has announced that Melania, a documentary about Melania Trump, will open exclusively in theaters on January 30th, 2026. So be prepared for Melania Mania, if you will. And some people might judge me for mispronouncing her name there. Um, but you know what? They always mispronounced Kamala Harris as Kamala or something like that. So, you know what? I'm going to pronounce it like however I want. They take such liberties, so I'm going to do the same thing. And the film will later move to streaming, so be excited about that. And Amazon also plans a three-part docu-series tracing her movements between Trump Tower in New York City, Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach, and Washington, D.C. So it's almost like where in the world is Carmen San Diego, only you're tracking a, a real life person. How about that? So Amazon paid $40 million to license the rights to this project, a striking sum for a nonfiction film. Although I assure you, there will be some fictional elements in here, as any type of film like this will probably have some of that. But even more so in this case because Trump is involved. And in a first look image released by the studio, Melania is shown gazing out of an SUV at an airport tarmac. So, according to promotional material, the documentary gives, quote, unprecedented access to the 20 days leading up to the 2025 presidential inauguration through the eyes of the First Lady elect herself, end quote. So how exciting is that? We had Elon Musk sieg heiling at the inauguration and engaging in some pointed Nazi type rhetoric. So it's going to be a very exciting propaganda film that's going to be unleashed through the blessing of Amazon. The studio further touts exclusive footage of critical meetings and private conversations as Melania coordinates inauguration plans, confronts the logistical and symbolic burdens of transition, and reemerges into the public sphere. Too bad she did that. She should have stayed completely in the shadows, where she belongs, where all of the Trumps belong. Well, they don't belong in the shadows necessarily. I don't know, like back into the realm even before shadows are possible, just like a distant memory, like a mirage. Let's finally move past this decrepit family, this dysfunctional family that's trying to be the biggest political dynasty in the world. And Trump wants to be a king, and he's like the Burger King, I guess you might say, because he literally stuffs his face with burgers all the time. And don't get me wrong, I love burgers myself, but um, he acts like he's the fittest president of all time and stuff. But no, he's fat. He's he's fat, and he's got dumb looking hair. I cut my hair today, and guess what? My inexperienced barber shop ability surpasses any sort of look he's ever achieved with his hair. His hair has always looked stupid, and doesn't Melania ever give him tips on like she actually makes it look all right. With her look, I mean, she was a model and everything. How come Donald Trump, who supposedly prides himself on, appearing in public, how come he always wants to look like a damn clown? Like with the orange Cheeto dust spread all over his face? Like he would actually look better if he, you know, uh, didn't wear the makeup and just got people used to him looking like a pale, old miser. He's always got those like pinched cheeks that, that's it's hard to even describe it. He's got that weird expression, like he's like I don't know, like almost squinting with his eyes a lot of the time too. Like he's a model on the runway. I guess that's what that's what he's trying to look like. I guess Melania looks a little bit like him too, you know. But anyway, maybe I'm getting sidetracked with all of this. Melania Trump is not just the subject; she participated in making the film and holds a production credit. So how cool is that? You know, she's advancing her career. While she has historically maintained a guarded public persona, her increased visibility in 2024 and controversial statements, such as her stated support for abortion rights, have stirred debate within conservative circles. That's right. Remember, at one point she said she was actually not opposed to abortion. So, you know, she should probably divorce Donald Trump for that reason alone. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water there. And the director of this monstrosity of a documentary is Brett Ratner, known for mainstream hits like Rush Hour, Tower Heist, Red Dragon, X Men The Last Stand, and Money Talks. So, actually, a few of those movies I like. But Ratner has been largely absent from major Hollywood projects since 2017, when six women accused him of sexual misconduct in a Los Angeles Times investigation. So, the accusations included claims of harassment, assault, and inappropriate behavior in private and on set settings. Warner Brothers responded by cutting its ties to Ratner and ending its co producing deal with his production company. So, I mean, to be clear, Ratner has contested the claim or the claims and was never criminally charged, but this is yet another case of somebody with these types of accusations being in Trump's orbit. And then you have the fact that such accusations have also been there against Donald Trump. And he, of course, admitted in a conversation with Howard Stern back in the day that he would walk into the dressing rooms of the Miss Teen USA pageant, which he owned, and he would say that, you know, he was able to check out the either nude, the fully nude, or partially dressed women backstage, the young ladies, because they were teenagers, sometimes probably under 18. And, you know, his excuse would be that, oh, I was just inspecting what was going on back there. Yeah, I'm sure he did some inspecting. Um, but anyway, you know, that's one of the uh, allegations that he actually verified, you know, and you know, he said that himself. He volunteered that information out into the world, and I guess it's up to you whether you want to believe that or not. But again, it's straight from the horse's mouth, or I guess we might say the horn dog's mouth in this case. And you know, Ratner saw a documentary about a high-profile political figure as a plausible pathway back into relevance. That's what's going on there, just to be clear. And this project raises several flagrant contradictions and questions. You have the propagandist aspect of it. It's a film backed by a corporate behemoth, you know, in this case, Amazon, but, you know, it could have been another company, presumably. And, you know, that company has deep pockets and ties to the surveillance and logistics state. That's well documented. And it's about a figure in the ruling political class, and it's hardly a neutral cultural document. So keep that in mind. It offers a sanitized inside look at power, an opportunity for image control by the same elites that it purports to humanize. So, indeed, that is one of the purposes of this documentary. It is to humanize the same figures that we're told are larger than life. So, there's that sort of built in contradiction here. You know, these people are supposed to be relatable and fun and human just like us, yet they're supposed to be like kings or gods or dictators or emperors or whatever the hell you want to compare them to. Just like, some people who truly believe in this stuff, they think like Trump was put here by God himself, like the old wise bearded man in the sky looked down and said, "Hey, we need this orange-faced clown to come down here and harass women and you know fail a bunch of businesses, inherit $400 million from his dad, and then eventually sort of weasel his way into the presidency by developing a personality cult based around at least partly his celebrity status, but also uh, about the right wing media and the anxieties and prejudices and fears. Like remember this idiot, he largely rode in on a wave of fear of Obama. And that the idea was that, oh, he wasn't born in this country, and he's a secret Muslim, but he's also an atheist, and he's a communist, but he's also a you know he was basically in Wall Street's pockets. And you would actually hear some right wingers who would admit that Trump was catering to the elites and the wealthy and corporations, but they would also call him a communist at the same time. So it's kind of interesting. And it's not like you can never have a class traitor, but if you're like squarely in the pockets of Wall Street, like Obama largely was. Obama himself he compared himself to Richard Nixon, I believe, and he was a relatively moderate figure. But Trump rode in on a wave of anti-Obama hysteria and also Islamophobia. Remember, he was trying to get the United States government to unconstitutionally block all Muslims from entering the country. Again, totally unconstitutional. You can't have the government bar people of a certain religion from merely entering and existing in the country. But Trump never actually cared about what the Constitution says. Right from the start, he disregarded that. And of course, he was a basher of Mexican immigrants as well. I could go through the whole thing. But, they're trying to really humanize him and his wife in this documentary. That's what this is. Even though he dehumanizes everybody else, it's a very telling aspect of this documentary that they're trying to really make them seem normal, even though they're about as abnormal as people can get. And well, as another aspect of this, like remember, like I just said, he was trying to ban Muslims from entering this country. Yet he's allied with Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest Islamic theocracy, um, and also a major human rights abuser, and all that kind of stuff. And you could even note that the terrorists who attacked the United States on September 11th were actually they had more in common with Saudi Arabia than they did with Afghanistan, actually. So anyway, moving on past that point, this is also about access and control. That Melania has production credit suggests she will have influence over narrative framing. The so called exclusive access is likely filtered through her team. Well, not just likely. I shouldn't say likely. It's definitely going to be filtered through her team, reducing transparency about real tensions, dissenting voices, or behind the scenes power plays that actually most certainly were occurring at the time of the inauguration, and of course, before and after. You've got that same stuff going on right now. So it's really about money and spectacle, too. The $40 million licensing deal, it shows that profit, spectacle, and political myth making converge very often. And when documenting those in power becomes a high stakes commodity, critical distance often yields to market logic. And old regimes new reputations is also a theme here, or at least that's what they seem to think. Ratner's comeback through a political figure with deep polarization shows how the entertainment industrial complex recycles scandal and rebrands it through access to elite patronage. That a director accused of abuse would be entrusted with access to the nation's most watched political family speaks to how power shelters itself, if you really think about it. All right, on to the second segment of the show. And today we're talking about Paolo Zampoli, who is an Italian, of course. And I did check up on the pronunciation because I don't typically speak Italian names. And that is apparently how you pronounce it. It's Paolo, if you want to know that. So you might have seen that name around somewhere, that first name. So I'm kind of doing a public service, letting you know how it's said. Anyway, he is the peripheral poop head of the week. And it's not so much that he's a particularly scandalous figure, nor does it seem like he's like a complete idiot or something. But it's one of those things where the political system itself is idiotic, or whatever you want to call it. It's just corrupt, and putting these figures into our lives, like this guy here. And you have to wonder what the ultimate benefit is for the public, uh, with this guy. So long before her name became entwined with power, Melania built her early life around fashion circuits in Europe, and that's how she ties into Mr. Zampoli. She began modeling at 16 after being discovered by a Slovenian photographer, and later dropped out of studies in design or architecture to pursue modeling full time. You know, just like a conservative family values type of family would want their own daughters to do. You know, become a model. Don't actually, go into something like architecture. Just strut down the catwalk. That because that's family values on display. Anyway, in the early 1990s, she competed in the Jaina magazine Look of the Year contest, finishing among the runners up, which opened doors to agencies in Milan and beyond. Again, just like the standard average American family. Over the next few years, she moved between Paris and Milan, seeking gigs with fashion houses and magazines. Around 1995, she met Paolo Zampoli, then a co owner or talent scout of Metropolitan Models, and that was during his scouting trips in Europe. So Zampoli later claimed that he arranged for her to relocate to New York in 1996 by helping to secure an H-1B visa based on her prior European modeling portfolio. And once in Manhattan, Melania found representation and lived in housing arranged by Zampoli's modeling interests. So she reportedly accepted paid modeling assignments. Some documents show she was paid about $20,000 over 10 assignments in the US before her official work visa was approved, raising questions about the legal boundaries of her immigration status. So that this is according to the Guardian. So this is alleged, just to be clear. And in New York, Zampoli introduced her in 1998 to Donald Trump, at least according to the official narrative. You'll hear other stories about who was involved in introducing them, but this is the official narrative. And this was allegedly at a fashion industry party, thereby forging the personal connection that later blossomed into their romantic relationship or business partnership, whatever you want to call it. And not long after that introduction, their relationship deepened culminating years later in marriage, and that happened on January 2005. So, turning to Zampoli, he was born March 5th, 1970, in Milan. He is an Italian born entrepreneur based in New York. As of March 2025, he was appointed U.S. Special Representative for Global Partnerships under President Trump. So, wow, there's no element of nepotism involved in that or anything like that. No way, no way. Never, never. He only introduced him to his wife. So, yeah, that's obviously not a key part of how he got that gig. But anyway, that role falls under the State Department's Office of Global Partnerships, an initiative created by Condoleezza Rice, I believe, intended to facilitate collaboration between government and the private sector in foreign affairs. And hey, what about that free market I've heard so much about? Why would they want a collaboration between government and the private sector? Doesn't the private sector just stand on its own two legs? Isn't there an invisible hand just gently guiding people into all of their free market decisions? Well, no, it turns out that the government is involved practically every step of the way. We have a so-called capitalist system, but it is actually a globally active and dominant legal system that sort of encapsulates everything that it possibly can, and it tries to make everything for profit. Literally everything is done for money, and you're supposed to love that. You can't get enough of it. You know, everything is for rent or for sale or some variation on that. And if you don't like it, well, you can just get out. That's the attitude. You must be one of those commie freaks or something if you don't like everything being about pimps and whores everywhere. Because that's ultimately what the system is. They give you a nice deal. Um, well, not necessarily. It's like everything has to have the almighty dollar attached. So it's what you have to it's what you have to deal with. They buy up all these properties and uh, own all the resources, want to make all of the decision making. That they own the utility companies. Everything's supposed to be for profit, and then some people are making way like a bandit out of these deals. But anyway, I'm generalizing a little bit too much. Let's get back into this Zampoli story. So, before this appointment, Zampoli founded ID Model Management in New York in the mid 1990s and developed close ties with Trump's business ecosystem, even serving at one point as a director of the international development under the Trump organization. And over time, he pivoted into real estate and environmental ventures, interestingly enough. And that includes projects tied to the United Nations and climate initiatives. So that actually kind of seems to maybe complicate Trump's narratives about, environmentalism a little bit. I don't know. Um, so I don't really know all of the details about uh, his environmental ventures. So maybe I should have looked into that more in advance here, but it's an interesting little aspect of this character. And the trajectory of Melania and Zampoli, it just shows how individuals navigate and exploit elite networks and state apparatuses. Her modeling career, immigration path, and eventual entry into a political sphere, it it all can illustrate how these cultural capital uh, dynamics and private influence operate hand in glove with state power. It's a weird world we live in, right? Where somebody who's just a model, like I don't really think she went into any other field, but she was just a model, but now she's like a potentially powerful figure. I guess she technically doesn't seem to really chase after power for herself that much, but she's definitely in the orbit of power. And Zampoli's role as a special representative is not subject to the same checks as confirmed constitutional offices. Many such envoys are politically appointed and not Senate confirmed. So that's something, maybe our system might want to, you know, look at changing. Not that Senate confirmed positions are necessarily going to be better, but maybe they should be that way. And the revolving door between modeling real estate diplomacy and centralized power suggests that in capitalist societies, influence, it's a key component. Social visibility can convert directly into political leverage, reinforcing inequality and undermining any notion of democratic accountability in this case. And yeah, it's just an interesting story about how this Italian figure who was involved in the modeling business. He also had some real estate ties with Trump, and it's also got him into some official positions in the government where there's limited accountability. So, way to go, dude. You made it. All right, the third segment. This one I'm calling the Fetid Fever Dream Flashback of the Week. I've done this before plenty of times. And this time we're going to be looking at somebody named Roosevelt Scarrett. And in October 2013, Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett appointed Zampoli as United Nations ambassador and ambassador for oceans and seas for the Commonwealth of Dominica. So it's interesting to look at some scandals related to this Roosevelt Scarrett character. There are several recurring allegations against Scarrett. Some are better documented than others, some proven, some more speculative. And here are what many consider to be among the most serious. These include diplomatic passport scandals and ambassadorial post sale allegations. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. I I almost wish I had rewritten that in my little script here. But an Al Jazeera investigation claims that wealthy foreign businessmen gave Scarrett money or campaign support in return for diplomatic passports or, or ambassador positions. So, for example, Manoj Bula, a witness, alleges that an Iranian businessman got a diplomatic passport through Scarrett, through similar through campaign support or maybe through money. And you've also got a discrepancy um, between his salary and the declarations. The stated salary and what his actual uh, wealth amount is apparently. So, despite claiming when first elected that he had very few assets, Scarrett has acquired multiple properties worth large sums, at least for Dominica's economy, while being on a modest public salary. So there are rumors also about gifts versus payments and lack of full explanations. That's according to Dominica News Online. If you want to read more about that, you might be able to find more details there. And it reminds me of that scene in Goodfellas where the character played by Robert De Niro, he's chastising people for you know wearing fur coats or buying new cars because it'll attract too much attention, because they don't want to look like they have increased wealth after a recent robbery or heist or however you want to describe it. basic theft. And I really don't know for sure. I mean, this is alleged, but there are apparent discrepancies between the public salary that this person receives and the material wealth that he has. So he's also been accused of treating people, that is, providing food, entertainment, etc., to influence votes. It's a form of election misconduct. So Scarrett and members of his party have been accused of treating in the period leading up to elections. There was a case that reached the Caribbean Court of Justice, or the CCJ, but charges were dismissed or discontinued, and you can read about that in the Jamaica Observer. Sorry, I said Jamaican Observer, but it's called Jamaica Observer. So this is something where the charges were dismissed, and that kind of it happens sometimes, for one reason or another. And there was also a tourism development passport scheme. There's allegations that a scheme involving selling passports, especially to Chinese buyers, was used to fund tourism infrastructure in Liu River, but that the funds or promised development didn't materialize or were misused, perhaps. And critics of Scarrett say that government oversight was weak and possibly complicit. There is also a Ross University visas scandal. Luxury visas for faculty of Ross Medical School is involved. There were allegations that they were overvalued, that financing came through opaque loans or fronts, and that Scarrett may have been involved behind the scenes. So, here's another one that's interesting: the Citizen by Investment, or CBI, and the Sale of Nationhood scandal. So, Dominica's CBI program, offering citizenship or passports to foreigners in exchange for investment, is a major source of revenue. It's legal, but it has been critiqued for opacity, potential for corruption, and for raising ethical questions about national sovereignty. Should that be something that really has a dollar value for the person who wants to become a citizen? It's like shouldn't that be just something that's determined regardless of a person's income level? Well, not according to some people out there. The hyper capitalists who again want everything to be about money. So some claims suggest misuse or underreporting of the funds, and again, that's according to Dominica News Online. So, which is the biggest scandal here? Determining which scandal is the biggest depends on criteria. The scale, financial, institutional, the impact on citizens or democratic norms, and of course, proof matters. So, if I had to pick, the diplomatic passport or ambassador sale allegations, plus the citizenship by investment controversies, look among the most serious because they implicate core functions of government, that is, citizenship, passports, and diplomatic credentials. They involve large sums and international actors. They undermine the idea of public accountability and fair governance. Also, the accumulation of personal wealth outstripping salary declarations has a strong political moral weight, especially in a small country where resources are limited and inequality is felt pretty sharply. And, as I often do on this podcast, I'm going to look at the anarchist perspective here. And why do I do that? Well, because it's interesting how so many of these political figures actually only verify the claims of the far left radicals out there who critique government and corporations and, you know, claim the whole system is corrupt. So over and over and over again, I've demonstrated how these types of figures actually verify those critiques. And frankly, it's a little bit surprising that um, I haven't done more episodes on a lot of these types of scandals. I'm trying to balance things out between doing just fluff types of episodes and also more serious ones. But there's a lot to get through here. So if you look at the anarchist framework that tends to critique power, hierarchy, state coercion, property relations, and the illusion of legitimacy. So from that lens, here's how these scandals might be assessed and what they reveal or confirm about Scarrett's governance in those terms. And of course, not just Scarrett, but other people who are engaged in similar practices. So we're going to look at the power and monopoly over legitimate authority angle here. So the silly Billy goofball anarchists out there are deeply skeptical of centralized power, how it is acquired, how it's kept, and how it's justified. So the passport sale and citizenship by investment issues show a state treating membership or citizenship as transactional commodity rather than mutual social obligation. And this commodification strengthens power hierarchies. Those with money or foreign connections gain access, while ordinary people do not. It's like the classic critique of, the ability of immigrants to freely travel where they want. Well, if you're an ordinary immigrant who doesn't have a lot of money, somehow you're not allowed to freely travel practically anywhere where you want. But if you are somebody who is wealthy, wow, magically you can be in all kinds of different places. It's almost like that's by intent of design, like it's a class system, and they're intentionally creating these discrepancies in freedom. So it's almost like it's verifying these radical talking points about the system being rigged by the haves against the have-nots. And the ideological aspect of it, the psychological aspect of having more power than these people, being able to look down at them like they're ants, and the rich and powerful are actually like gods among ants. They could choose to crush them any time if they wanted to, and maybe they'll throw a crumb down or something like that for the ants. But a lot of the time, the only thing that trickles down is like the piss that they splash onto those pesky people down there. And that's, I think, a lot of the time the image that seems to be verified again and again and again by these types of people. So what about corruption and legitimacy? So a state depends on consent or at least acquiescence. Legitimacy is eroded by corruption, favoritism, opaqueness, and the anarchist types argue that every unjust action by the state weakens the moral basis for its rule. So if Scarrett's government is enriching insiders, bypassing oversight, using patronage, etc., that reduces legitimacy. And the treating slash election misconduct allegations are particularly damaging. Elections under unfair conditions are not really consent. That's an interesting thing to consider, because you know consent is supposed to be a big part of legitimacy. It's like how you're supposed to verify that we are a free society, that people largely agree with what's going on. And that's why most contracts are one-sided. It's like more symbolic consent than meaningful consent. It's there as a legal technicality to allow the courts to have one party in the agreement to have more power than the other party. So that's why in many ways these contracts are like little tricks their manipulations to get people to sometimes agree to things where there's a lot of small print or a lot of terms that most people aren't even going to like read all the way through or anything like that. And that's how they get you, really. So and you're not going to be able to afford a lawyer too, of course. So good luck if you ever want to like uh sue anybody in some sort of agreement. But I mean, with people like these, there's an increasing lack of distinction between public and private. Business and corporation, and in some case, religion are just totally merging together, and they're creating a clusterfuck of chaos where it's very hard to even argue against stuff because everything's so convoluted. You've got so many weird issues built into things, like if you've got if you've got like a theocratic government, and it's like a theocracy, and you've got relationships um, with countries like the United States. Well, you have to wonder at what point is consent even happening at at any level, because you've got these power structures that can crush populations seemingly on a whim. So, what good is consent of the governed when all these different governments are like basically consenting with each other to hold the public down? You know what I mean? Just keep people down, keep them in some cases actually like starving. If we're looking at actual genocides or something like that, but also just taking away more and more rights on a global scale. And you've also got property inequality and redistribution going on. So, anarchism is concerned with unjust concentration of property or resources, especially when linked to the state. And the role of state in perpetuating class divides is also apparent. Like I was just talking about, if you're rich and well connected, you can travel freely all over the globe if you want. But if you're very poor, you're vilified for even thinking about doing so without the permission of the ultra rich. Why would you even think about traveling somewhere freely? There are all sorts of restrictions that are especially there for you to keep you in line and keep you subservient, and in some cases just keep you out of the picture altogether. And if these sorts of restrictions end up killing you, well, so what? That's freedom, baby. That's the free market at work. And the accusations of property accumulation, in this case with Scarrett, inflated government contracts, etc., they point to a class of elites benefiting from state power while the lower strata carry costs, inequality under provision of public goods, etc. And what about transparency, accountability, and autonomy? So those dastardly anarchists would emphasize grassroots control, bottom up decision making, accountability to people rather than institutions. Many of these scandals I'm talking about here hinge on lack of transparency: who paid what, who benefited, where the money went. That feeds into alienation. Citizens aren't able to monitor or challenge decisions. Also, concerns about external influence. That they might breed paranoia. You've got all these different foreigners, so um, all these foreign populations, all these foreign governments involved. So you can easily exploit those types of fears instead of holding your own system accountable. So you can have allies kind of backstab each other ultimately, and they can uh, totally do an about face and turn former allies into enemies just at random if you want, as sort of a distraction from the crooked people at the top. And what is the what is the situation here? It's crazy. And the interesting thing is that Scarrett scandals aren't just sins by an individual or a party. They're symptoms of a political system structured to allow elites leverage, and they've got state tools for personal gain. Instead of relying purely on elections or legal oversight, which can be captured, I, I might argue for stronger decentralized alternatives, cooperative governance, community control over citizenship related decisions, and public oversight over investment funds, etc. So, this idea that you can just buy your way into citizenship, that should go the way of the dodo. You should be able to become a citizen and travel freely around the world, just because you're a human being, and because you don't have an extensive record as like a serial killer or something like that. That should be all that is required. It shouldn't matter what type of job you might have, or even if you have a job. Are you a public safety threat? Well, if you're not, then go right on ahead and travel around pretty much freely as a rich person might. So that's the radical vision that I'm talking about here. So, from what the publicly available evidence shows, the combination of the passport and diplomatic post sales, and the citizenship by investment and personal wealth accumulation not matching declared income seem the most serious scandals associated with Scarrett. You know, those those are a lot actually. This is a fairly scandalous figure, and they reflect systemic problems of power concentration, lack of accountability, commodification of basic political membership, and inequality entrenched by the state. The underlying problem is not just bad actors, but a political system with the corruption built in and few effective checks and balances, which makes such abuses perfectly predictable.